In the darkest hours of World War II, as U-boats prowled the Atlantic, threatening to sever Britain's vital sea lanes, a silent, almost forgotten artery of the nation was stirring. Not the roaring skies, nor the churning oceans, but the quiet, winding veins of its ancient canals, and upon them a new, unexpected force was emerging, tasked with a desperate yet vital purpose. These were the women who kept Britain afloat, often unseen, always unacknowledged. These were the idle women. Before the U-boats lurked and the bombs fell, Britain, particularly for women, was a landscape of unspoken expectations. For many, especially in the middle classes, life was largely confined to the domestic sphere. Opportunities for formal careers were scarce, and for many, existence was defined by homemaking, polite social duties, or temporary unfulfilling clerical work before the expected path of marriage. If they weren't engaged in these roles, they were, in a societal sense, very much considered idle women, awaiting their true purpose. Their strength, their resilience, their very capability for physical, demanding work was largely untested and certainly untapped. And then came the war. By 1940, Britain was a fortress under siege. The Battle of the Atlantic choked off imports, and the railways buckled under the immense pressure, while coastal shipping became a death trap. The nation's very arteries were severed, and industry, from armaments to food production, faced paralysis. Amid this desperate crisis, an almost forgotten network built over a century before for industrial purposes was suddenly thrust back into the strategic spotlight: the winding, quiet canals. They offered a lifeline, a safe inland route for vital goods hidden from the enemy's gaze. But who would crew the boats? The traditional boatmen, generations of families who lived and breathed the waterways, had answered a different call. They were fighting on distant battlefields, leaving hundreds of vital boats empty, threatening to grind Britain's war machine to a halt. It was into this crucial, desperate void that the women stepped forward. The Ministry of War Transport, facing an unprecedented labour crisis, launched a radical scheme to recruit women to work the canals. They were often young, fresh out of schools, office jobs, or directly from their family homes. Students, clerical workers, shop assistants, volunteers, they came from every background, united by a fierce patriotism and a profound ignorance of what awaited them. They were issued with identification badges, often with the initials IDLE for Inland Waterways Department Labour Corps. The nickname Idle Women stuck, but it would soon become a badge of honour, reclaimed with defiant pride. One example was Emma Smith. She was just 18 from a comfortable middle-class home, suddenly grappling with a 70-foot boat in the biting cold and the relentless physical toil. Her memoir, Maiden's Trip, vividly captures the shock and the rapid, brutal education they learned on the job, often from sceptical traditional boatmen under immense pressure. Emma's hands, once accustomed to finer things, quickly became calloused, her muscles aching from the endless struggle with enormous lock gates. She recounts instances where a crew member was nearly killed, almost crushed between boats or against a lock wall, a stark reminder of the ever-present danger in this seemingly peaceful world. Their life was a relentless cycle of physical exertion and primitive living. They slept in tiny, cramped cabins, often just 7 by 9 feet, where a small coal stove was the only source of heating, barely enough to dry sodden clothes. Hygiene was a constant battle, and they were always on the move, facing every imaginable challenge. The grind of the work itself took a severe physical toll, leading to chronic illnesses like pleurisy, pneumonia, and debilitating rheumatic pains from constant exposure to the cold and the damp. They often found themselves far from proper medical care, isolated for weeks on end. The canal networks, while a lifeline, could also be a vast, lonely expanse for women cut off from conventional society. Sickness or injury in a remote location could turn dangerous very quickly. Picture the shared, harrowing experiences, the sheer terror of being iced in during a brutal winter, sometimes for weeks, stranded with dwindling supplies, battling the freezing temperatures and the back-breaking work of literally chopping ice to free your boat, or the profound claustrophobia and danger of navigating mile-long tunnels in absolute blackout conditions, the thick air with exhaust fumes, relying only on a small flickering lamp and your wits to avoid collisions. The Braunston Tunnel was a notorious stretch, its dark mouth swallowing boats whole, demanding immense courage and skill from every crew. Many a time they faced mechanical failures, far from aid, deep in the countryside. And these weren't men with an engineering background, these were women, often with no prior mechanical experience and forced to become amateur engineers, figuring out how to repair engines, unblock propellers, or mend a broken steering mechanism, sometimes wading into freezing water to do so. This brings us to the very definition of hell raising. Imagine your boat, a flimsy shell of wood and iron, piled high with explosives, bombs, or volatile chemicals. Every bump, every shudder, every sharp turn carries the chilling potential for catastrophic detonation. This wasn't just coal, this was cargo that could turn your floating home into a fiery inferno in an instant. Now add the blackout, not just outside, but inside a mile-long tunnel. Your world shrinks to the suffocating confines of the tunnel, the echoing chug of your engine, and the terrifying knowledge of what you carry. You are navigating by sound and feel alone, praying you don't encounter another boat coming from the other direction, or worse, that the boat ahead of you breaks down. For many women, this was pure, unadulterated terror. There was no escape. They were trapped on a moving bomb in a concrete tube with only their skill and sheer luck to keep them alive. The fumes from the engines would build, causing headaches, dizziness, and further impairing senses, which were already strained by darkness and fear. The air would be thick, hot, and suffocating. This was the silent, daily bravery of Britain's idle women.